Hello and welcome back for another part of ESO Magicka Sorcerer DPS School. Today we're going to be covering all the different skills and skill lines that you should be leveling up or have leveled up just in case. I'm going to put them into three categories: must have, good to have, and icing on the cake. As you can imagine, anything that I list as must-have should be something to put first on your list of things to purchase when you have spare skill points, then go down to the good-to-have, and the icing on the cake is for when you now have more skill points than you know what to do with. The order of the skills within each category is not important. I'm just going to be going in the order that they're shown in-game and just kind of going in order of everything. First up, I'm going to be looking at the Sorcerer class skills, and the very first skill line will be Dark Magic. Dark Magic we don't exactly use a lot of skills from, but the passives are pretty nice, so we definitely want to level it up. For our must-have category, I would put Crystal Fragments, which before it's morphed is called Crystal Shard, in the absolutely must-have category. Even if you're using a rotation without Crystal Fragments at this time because it's a little more simple, at some point you'll probably want to move to a Crystal Fragments rotation, and it's the bread and butter of the Magicka Sorcerer DPS, so you'll definitely want to level it up along with all the passives. Another item we have in our must-have category in the Dark Magic skill line is Unholy Knowledge. This reduces the Magicka and stamina cost of all of your abilities by 5%. Now this is not just for your dark magic abilities, this is all of your abilities, and this is a huge thing. Sustain, 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 it's something that's going to keep coming up, so this is something you definitely want to get this passive as soon as possible. In the good to have category for the dark magic skill line, I would put Blood Magic and Exploitation. Blood Magic is something that is only useful if you have Crystal Fragments, so of course if you're not using Crystal Fragments yet, you can always wait to get this passive, but whenever you hit an enemy with one of these abilities, you heal for some of your max health, which is really nice to just get a little small free heal every once in a while. Exploitation is also when you use a dark magic ability, you grant yourself and your group Minor Prophecy. Now, the only other way to get Minor Prophecy in Elder Scrolls Online is through poisons, and in PvE you don't really see poison usage. We use enchants all the time, so this you'll be really happy that you're helping yourself and your group out by giving them the Minor Prophecy buff. Icing on the cake is the Persistence passive. Here, after blocking an attack, your next magic or stamina ability costs less. Normally, when you're in PvE, if you're blocking for a fair amount of time through a phase of something, and then for only one ability to cost a little bit less, it's okay. Definitely get it if you have spare skill points, but it's icing on the cake. Next up, we're moving along to the Daedric Summoning class skill line. As you can imagine, this is definitely devoted to pet Sorcs who will want all of these if you're a pet Sorc, but even as a non-pet Sorc, we are going to find some of these skills pretty important. Starting off with our must-have category is Haunting Curse. Haunting Curse is just awesome. It starts out as Daedric Curse. You can get Daedric Ray, that's only if you're a pet Sorc. So if you are not a pet Sorc, like this guide is meant for, you definitely want Haunting Curse. Haunting Curse adds a second explosion so that it's kind of just like a set it and forget it ability, and then all of a sudden it blows up twice and you can just layer on down and carry on with what you're doing. It's a really handy skill. Anything that takes time in ESO can be ticking while we're using other abilities so that we can kind of overlap all of the damage is really nice. The second item in our must-have category is going to be Bound Aegis. Bound Aegis starts out as Bound Armor, and it's a really handy skill. Now this is part of sorcerers don't have a lot of buttons to press, which makes them a little easier rotation, but this skill is just so good you don't want to give it up. While slotted, your max magicka is increased by 5%, plus you gain Minor Ward and Minor Resolve. Both of those minor buffs are buffs that will help make you a little less squishy as a DPS. So they'll actually make both of your resistances larger. This is really nice, make you a little less squishy, plus give you a whole bunch of magic. Daedric Protection is the only passive from this skill line I'm putting in the must-have category. It increases your health and stamina recovery by 20% while you have a Daedric summoning ability slotted. Of course, you're going to have at least Curse and Bound Aegis slotted, so 20% health and stamina recovery can make the difference in you being able to make that second dodge roll when you need to or not. So we don't put any points into stamina, so it's really nice to know that our stamina can recover a little more quickly after we're done blocking or dodge rolling, so that we can use those defensive mechanics again shortly thereafter. In the good to have category, I would put Hardened Ward, or if you have not morphed it yet, Conjured Ward. This is a shield, it's amazing. You have a class shield. There is 2 different morphs of this. Hardened Ward makes the shield bigger, and Empowered Ward makes it more of a sustain shield, but you'll notice later on that our light armor shield does really well at the sustain thing, so I really recommend taking Hardened Ward here. Of course, this is only in the good to have category because I am going to put the other shield in our must have category, but it's really nice to have 2 shields with kind of 2 different aspects, so Hardened Ward, definitely in the good to have category. Next item is Power Stone. Power Stone is definitely really good to have. It reduces the cost of your ultimate abilities by 15%. Keep in mind, it does not only reduce your sorcerer ultimate abilities by 15%, any ultimate ability that you slot will have its cost reduced by 15%. This means more ultimates, more damage, more awesome. So definitely grab this one. Our first ability in the must-have category is Mage's Wrath. Mage's Wrath is an execute, which means that it does more damage if the enemy is below a certain percentage of health. For this ability, that percentage of health is 20%. Of course, the non-morphed version is Mage's Fury. The other version of this, the Endless Fury morph, is actually not that bad, and it's something I would recommend if you are someone who tends to solo content or go in the overland and finds yourself running out of magicka, because you restore magicka every time that you kill a mob with this ability. So if you're going for group content and you're looking to do more damage, you're not so worried about the rest of the sustain because maybe you have a healer feeding you orbs, go ahead with the Mage's Wrath version where you do a little bit of splash damage as well. Liquid Lightning. Liquid Lightning is super important. Lightning Splash is the non-morphed version of it. No matter what sorcerer build you find, I dare you, go ahead and find a sorcerer build that is fantastic that doesn't have Liquid Lightning in it. I'll be waiting. I'll be waiting. No, seriously though, this is one of those AoE dots that is just beautiful. It meshes so well with your Wall of Elements or your Elemental Blockade that it's just too good not to use. You definitely want to be taking the increased duration version. I know that this one increases the radius and you think, but I can target, I can hit more things. I promise you, you want the increased duration. The reason you want the increased duration version is so that it matches up nicer with Elemental Blockade, but also the idea behind some really good DPS is that you're constantly layering things. So it's not only the ability you are currently pressing the button for that's doing damage, you also have a bunch of other things doing damage over time. They're all just constantly layering and doing more and more damage. This is one of those abilities. You just lay it down and you have time to do all these other abilities while this thing is constantly doing damage. So the longer that goes on, the easier it is to get your rotation in and do all those other things. Capacitor is our first passive. I'm putting in the must-have category for the Stormcalling skill line because it increases your magicka recovery by 10%. 10%! That's awesome! You want sustain. Sustain is good. You need magicka. You need more recovery. Grab the capacitor passive. Implosion. This is really cool. So when you deal shock damage, which your sorcerer, a bunch of your abilities are shock damage, you have a 6% chance to instantly disintegrate enemies under 15% health, dealing 10,000 shock damage. This is amazing. This is like a built-in passive execute. It's super cool, super handy when you're using, when you have trash mobs, you're going to be using your Liquid Lightning, which is going to be hitting a whole bunch of them. So let's say they get below 15%, all of a sudden like, pew, pew, you're gonna be executing them with your passive. Implosion is definitely in the must-have category, and I recommend grabbing it as soon as possible. Here is the Expert Mage passive, yes, another must-have. This increases your weapon and spell damage by 2% for each sorcerer ability slotted. This is really good, even 4%, that's a huge buff. I'm constantly suggesting things for sustain for a sorcerer, so hey, it's really nice to see a straight-up damage passive as well. Now we're going to move on to the good to have category. And I'll have you know that I actually really struggled deciding if Surge and Power Surge should be in the good to have or the must have category, because I think this ability is really, really awesome, and maybe you don't use it so much at like ultimate top tier endgame because you're getting these things from other sources, but it's such a useful ability. So Surge, or Power Surge, the Magicka version that you're going to take, this is both a buff. It gives you major sorcery, which normally you're going to gain from your spell power potions. So this gives you major sorcery for 33 seconds. That's a really long time. It's really awesome. This allows you to go do normal dungeons or while you're doing overland content to not spend those expensive potions. Go ahead and use Power Surge instead. You will still get that major sorcery buff and not be using those expensive potions. Of course, while active, dealing a critical strike heals you. So this means not only is it giving you your major damage buff, it is also actually a small heal that's going to come in over time. This is really, really good. Once again, if you are doing normal dungeons, maybe pugging it, you're not sure who your healer is or how good they are, or maybe you're out doing overland content by yourself and you just don't have a healer, this is that constant type of heal that's just always coming in, as well you have a major damage buff. Power Surge is a super cool ability, but because we don't use it at the top end game, I did only put it in the good to have category. Energized is a passive ability in Stormcalling that increases your physical and shock damage by 5%. Really enjoy this passive. It is definitely good to have, especially if you're using a backbar shock staff, but no matter what, it's very useful for a sorcerer to have. Icing on the cake in the Stormcalling ability consists of Lightning Form, or if you want to morph it up, Boundless Storm. This is a really fun ability that is going to do a cool couple different things, and I generally advise this ability for like overland content. Essentially, you become a ball of lightning almost, so anything that kind of gets near you is going to get zapped with lightning, so it does a little bit of damage. It also gives you major resolve and major ward, which increases your resistances, making you a little less squishy. And for a little tiny bit after you activate it, it actually gives you major expedition, which like makes you go faster. So it kind of gives you a little speed boost as well. It's just a really fun, useful ability while you're doing overland content as a sorcerer. So I decided to put Boundless Storm as an icing on the cake ability. Now, because we use 2 destruction staves, there is a lot of the abilities in this skill line that are super important. So starting out in the must-have category is Elemental Rage. The unmorphed version is Elemental Storm, and yes, you want to grab Elemental Rage. As cool as Eye of the Storm sounds, you just want to do more damage straight up. Believe me, most bosses don't move a whole bunch, so this is a really good, really, really great ultimate to have. Elemental Rage packs a big punch in its single target DPS as well as being AoE. This means when you have large groups of adds, this ultimate will absolutely melt them, but it's also great to use single target against bosses. The next must-have ability in the Destruction Staff skill line is Crushing Shock, which morphs from Force Shock. Now, Force Pulse can do more DPS, it does deal increased damage, and it has the whole shock or, splash damage effect, but I promise you, Crushing Shock is where it's at. You will find the interrupt on this ranged ability so useful. Just the utility in this ability is way too large to bother with the little bit extra DPS from Force Pulse. please grab Crushing Shock. Crushing Shock is a great ability, and everyone will thank you when nobody can run up to a mob and interrupt them fast enough, and you can just pew pew from far away and interrupt that mob. Crushing Shock is also a really neat ability because it is actually like 3 direct damage all at once, because every time you use Crushing Shock, it hits an enemy 3 times. Once with flame damage, once with frost damage, and once with shock damage, so that's another cool thing about it. Elemental Blockade, or Wall of Elements, as the unmorphed version is called, is the bread and butter of pretty much any Magicka DPS ability. This is one of those damage over time, AoEs, area of effects. This means that anybody in that area is going to be taking damage as well. It's going to be ticking away while you are laying down all your other abilities. So when you're layering this with your Liquid Lightning and your Haunting Curse and then using your Crushing Shock, like, enemies are just getting peppered with damage from all over the place, and it's really, really useful. Next up in our must-have category is down on the passive abilities in our Destruction Staff skill line, Penetrating Magic. Your Destruction Staff abilities ignore 10% of any enemy's spell resistance. Penetration in ESO is kind of like a secret stat that the in-game character sheet doesn't tell you about. You need an add-on to actually be able to see what your penetration is, or you just have to do all the math. This is really handy because when you get at a really high-end level, you're trying to like teeter on the brink of having enough spell penetration, but you don't want to go over or it's a complete waste. So this allows you to stay a little bit below it, but really, because of this, now your Destruction Staff abilities are probably hitting max penetration, and you didn't have to drop another stat to gain it. It's just a passive. Penetrating Magic, definitely a must-have ability. Elemental Force, another fantastic passive. This increases your chance to apply status effects. Burning. Do you know what burning does? Burning just does more damage. This is literally a passive that says when you use something, this passive procs and just straight up does more free damage without you spending Magicka, without it taking a global cooldown, and without it messing up your rotation. Free damage. That's what it is. It's amazing. And Concussion, that's from Shock Staffs. It's pretty handy too. But Elemental Force, definitely a must-have passive. Ancient Knowledge. So this ability is the reason that you'll notice that people change where things are on their bar to make sure no matter what, they have a Destruction Staff ability on both bars. You'll see that more when people use the Psijic skill line, because then they're taking out their Crushing Shock spammable and putting in a Psijic one, so it kind of messes stuff up. But this is the passive that is the reason for that. While you have a Destruction Staff ability slotted, so this means there really has to be an ability on each bar. With a Flame Staff, you're going to be doing increased single target damage. A Lightning Staff, it's going to increase your damage done with area of effect. So this is why you always want an Inferno Staff on your front bar, which contains your spammable, which is a single target ability, like Crushing Shock. While you are on that bar, anything that is a single target ability will be doing more damage. And weirdly enough, the last I checked, Haunting Curse, the part of it that is single target still increases from this. But yes. And then while you're on your back bar, all of your AoEs, like your Liquid Lightning and your Wall of Elements, are going to be doing more damage because you have a Lightning Staff on your back bar. This is really, really handy. It only works if you have a Destruction Staff ability on both bars. Or it'll only work on one bar if you don't. I hope you understand what I mean here. Fortunately, with the Sorcerer, we tend to have them on all of our bars, so we don't need to worry about that too much, but just something to keep in mind if you are going that Psijic route. Make sure if you use a Psijic spammable and you have no Destruction Staff things on your front bar, make sure you put the ultimate on your front bar, and that way Ancient Knowledge passive will kick in. This ability is really good to have. Elemental Drain, which morphs from weakness to the elements. This is not something you're actually going to be using in combat. Normally a healer will supply this. But if you want to practice your rotation, or you want to actually test your, DPS up against a target demi by yourself, you're going to want to have Elemental Drain. It just helps your sustain so much more. Obviously, you don't really need to use this in combat all the time. Usually the healer will. Hence why it's just a good to have ability and not a must have, but definitely recommend grabbing this. A passive we have in our good to have section is Try Focus. This will actually just add a little boom to the heavy attacks. So on your flame staff, your heavy attacks are going to do more damage. And this is the ability that makes your shock staff heavy attacks have that splash damage. So it's a really good passive to have. Destruction Expert. This is a really nice to have ability. When you kill an enemy with a destruction staff ability, you restore 3600 Magicka. This means if your Wall of Elements happens to get that last tick off as it murders somebody, you get 3600 Magicka for free. It's awesome. It's really good. Sustain. You're gonna wonder how we have all these abilities for sustain and still don't have Magicka, but I promise you want this ability. It's really good to have. Now we're going to be moving along to our armor skill lines. The first one is light armor, which we are wearing 5 pieces of, so it's definitely a very important skill line for us. In the must-have, here you'll see, here's our shield in the must-have category, Harness Magicka. At first it is going to be annulment. This shield is really, really nice, and I really suggest the Harness Magicka version. A lot of mobs in ESO use Magicka damage or elemental damage of some kind that will make this shield beautiful because it gives you Magicka back whenever you get hit with any of that Magicka damage. If you find yourself in a scenario where you're getting beat up by non-Magicka damage, then you can go ahead and slot in your Hardened Ward instead and just have a all-around bigger shield. This gives you the best of both worlds as a sorcerer. You have both shields available to you, both types, without having to respec it all. So go ahead and grab Harness Magicka, must-have ability. Here we have Evocation in our must-have category. You know, I talk about sustain a lot. Guess what this is? Sustain! This not only increases your Magicka recovery for each piece of light armor equipped, it also reduces the Magicka cost of your abilities. Super awesome. Sustain. Get it. Prodigy increases your spell critical rating. Finally another passive that is not about sustain. This makes sure that your spells are able to crit more often. Must have passive. Concentration. Most people expect you to have this passive if you're wearing light armor. This increases your spell penetration by quite a lot. Spell penetration is actually very important when you're looking at maximizing your DPS. You want to go all the way to the top, but not go over and all that. And this is actually, you get like 4,800 spell penetration from this passive once it's maxed out. And that is a huge number that you don't have to give up anything else for. Definitely a must-have passive. Now we're going to move on to our good-to-have category in the light armor skill line. Spell Warding. This increases your spell resistance. Keep in mind, does not increase your physical resistance, only spell resistance. So that's why it's good to have. It makes you less squishy. Definitely want it in the end, but there's more important things to get first. But definitely a good-to-have passive. And with our final passive, which is oddly the first one you are able to unlock, Grace. Grace is just icing on the cake. Honestly, you really don't. You skip this passive at first because there's nicer things out there to have. But it does reduce the effectiveness of snares, which is actually really handy in PvP. And it reduces the cost of sprint, which is really nice. But it's definitely an icing on the cake passive that if you're going for damage, there are better abilities and passives to purchase first. Now we're looking at the medium armor skill line. Yes, you are only wearing one piece of medium armor, but guess what? We want to take advantage of all the passives we can. Good to have is Athletics. This increases the movement speed bonus of sprint by 3%. So you're wearing one piece, so it increases by 3%. It also reduces the cost of roll dodge. Now, the main reason I'm saying this is a good to have passive is because it reduces the cost of roll dodge. Now, 4% isn't a ton, but let me tell you, you are a Magicka character. You do not put any points into stamina. You literally do nothing towards stamina. Sometimes that 4% difference will be the reason you can go and roll dodge twice when you accidentally roll dodge too early, or who knows, maybe it's just two things you have to roll dodge out of consecutively. You're going to be really happy because that roll dodge is going to be life or death, and it could have been this 4% that made the difference between you being able to do that roll dodge and not being able to. So because we have such a limited stamina pool, we want to make sure that our stamina abilities, such as roll dodge, are available to us whenever we need them. Windwalker is a icing on the cake kind of passive. This is something you can grab later on when you have too many skill points. This increases your stamina recovery by 4% because we only wear one piece. Once again, this will help when, due to our very, very limited stamina pool, it'll help us just get our stamina back a little bit faster. Unfortunately, that percentage bonus isn't that big because our recovery is just our base number anyways. It also reduces the stamina cost of your abilities. You're probably not using any stamina abilities, so that kind of is a meh. That's why it's just an icing on the cake passive. I wasn't even sure if I was going to include this passive on this list, but I'm putting it in icing on the cake. Improved sneak. This reduces the cost of sneak by 4% per piece of medium armor equipped. There's exactly one dungeon, so there's exactly one combat scenario in this entire game that you are going to actually have to sneak, and you might be thankful that it costs 4% less. But really, it's just really nice when you're going to do like the Thieves Guild or the Dark Brotherhood quest lines. It's really nice that sneak costs less, and as well, it reduces the size of your detection area, which, by the way, also useful in that one dungeon where it's actually during a boss fight that you need to sneak. So there is a combat reason to have this, but it's definitely icing on the cake. Now we move on to the heavy armor skill line. Now, oddly enough, there's actually a couple of passives in the heavy armor skill line that I consider must-have. The very first ability in the must-have category for heavy armor is Juggernaut. This increases your max health by 2%. This sounds like not a lot, but believe me, this passive is the difference between having to use that extra glyph or put those extra attribute points into health and not having to and be able to put them to Magicka instead. It will be noticeable if you respec your character and you forget to grab this passive. You're going to wonder why you're missing so much health. That 2% is noticeable, and it's a must-have ability when you're just trying to squeeze in as much Magicka as you can. Free passives to give you free health, definitely welcome. So definitely go ahead and grab that Juggernaut passive. Constitution is a passive that I really struggled in deciding if it should be in the must-have category or the good-to-have category. I decided to put it in the must-have category. This increases your health recovery, which is okay. Health recovery isn't really a stat that ever gets noticed in Elder Scrolls Online. It's not something we really care about. But what it also does is you restore a Magicka when you take damage. So this means that every 4 seconds that you take damage, you're getting a little bit of Magicka and stamina back. Sustain is everything, and it's just so useful. It's just really good to have. I put it in the must-have category. If you're missing other must-have abilities, I would go after those first, but then right after, I would grab the Constitution passive. Resolve is icing on the cake passive that increases our physical and spell resistance by a very small amount, but every little bit counts, and that's why it's an icing on the cake passive. Moving on to the guild skill lines, we're going to go into the Fighter's Guild ability, which seems kind of weird because all of them are stamina abilities. Don't worry, we won't be here long. Don't worry about leveling up the Fighter's Guild ability, just go unlock it. It will level naturally as you go ahead and do dungeons and do all your questing, and it only has one good-to-have passive. That good-to-have passive is Banish the Wicked. Every time that you kill undead, Daedric, or werewolf, you gain 9 ultimate. So if you're in a dungeon and there's like a whole bunch of undead, this can actually help you gain ultimate a lot faster. More ultimates, more boom, more DPS, so it's good to have. Next up is the guild skill line that maybe makes a little more sense for your Magicka Sorcerer, and that is the Mage's Guild. The Mage's Guild, we have quite a few must-have abilities, and the first one being the ultimate ability, Shooting Star, or also known as Meteor. Go ahead and grab Ice Comet or Shooting Star as you see fit. I'm a fan of Shooting Star, but I have been known to use Ice Comet before. It's a nice ability. It's a decent, it's a really decent ultimate. It's cheap. You can use it on mobs over and over again, but I mostly slot it just for the Mage's Guild passive that we'll get to shortly. The next must-have ability in the Mage's skill line for Magicka Sorcerers is Inner Light, and this is pretty much a must-have for any Magicka DPS. Inner Light is really nice. It's one of those abilities we keep on our bar for the passives, and you never actually press that button. Mage Light is what it was before it was morphed. Now, Inner Light, why do we want it? while slotted, your max magicka is increased by 5%. 5%! That's pretty good, because you are putting all your effort into making a really big magicka pool. 5% is actually going to be a really decent number. And you gain Major Prophecy. This increases your spell critical rating by 2,191. Now, there's a good chance you're actually going to get Major Prophecy from your crafted potions, but let's say you're in normal dungeons, you're using Surge for your Major Sorcery or whatever. Having this extra Major Prophecy coming from something that's just sitting on your bar and giving you 5% extra magicka is really, really nice. So this is definitely a must-have ability. Once I go over the passive, you'll realize that having Inner Light slot on your bar actually ends up giving you more than 5% max magicka. That brings me to my next must-have ability in the Mage's Guild skill line, Magicka Controller. This increases your max magicka and magicka recovery by 2% for each Mage's Guild ability slotted. So that means that when you slot Inner Light, you're actually going to get 7% max magicka, 5% from the ability, and 2% from the passive, plus you are going to increase your magicka recovery by 2%. Really, really solid passive. Great to have, must-have passive. This next passive, Mage Adept, is just an icing on the cake passive, and you're gonna understand why once I explain. This reduces the magicka and health cost of your Mage's Guild abilities by 8%. And when it says abilities, that means it doesn't count towards Meteor. We're only slotting an ability that we don't plan on ever pressing. Why? Why would I even want this passive? Well, you are going to accidentally press that button, and you're going to find out very quickly that Inner Light is not a cheap skill. Not at all. So you're going to accidentally press the Inner Light button, you're going to swear at yourself because it just ate up a ton of your magicka, and you're going to be angry. But you guess what? If you had some leftover skill points and you put into Mage Adept, then your Inner Light and your accidental clicking will cost a little bit less. Definitely icing on the cake, but nice to have. The last in the guild list of skill lines is Undaunted. Undaunted has some must-have and nice-to-have abilities. Of course, I'm not looking at any of the active abilities, but Undaunted Metal is a must-have passive. This passive is the entire reason that you are wearing 5 pieces of light armor, 1 piece of heavy, 1 piece of medium. It is huge because it increases your health, stamina, and magicka by 2% per type of armor. Every one of your stat pools is now getting a 6% bonus. That is huge. Once again, this is one of those passives that if you respec and you think, man, all my stats are really low, you probably forgot to put skill points back into this passive. It is a must-have passive. How do you level up Undaunted? Make sure that you go join Undaunted, do Undaunted pledges. You can do the Undaunted daily quest from Bogrul, who's by the pledge tent, or you can go ahead and do dungeons and get achievements from them. That will all help level up your Undaunted. Undaunted Command is also very nice to have. It's definitely in the nice to have category. You are going to enjoy orbs and shards specifically, and activating those synergies. Activating those synergies are going to give you some resources back, and if you have this passive, activating synergies are actually going to give you even more resources back in the form of health, stamina, and magicka. So Undaunted Command is a very nice to have passive. Now, I did want to touch on racial skills, even though this really, really depends on what race you chose. If it says something about magicka or spell something, it's a must-have. If it doesn't say anything about magicka or spell, then it's probably either nice to have, good to have, or icing on the cake. But if you have any racial abilities that say like spell damage, spell critical, spell penetration, or elemental damage, or max magicka, magicka recovery, any of that, those are a must-have. Grab them as soon as possible. If they don't mention anything like that, they're probably just good to have or nice to have, icing on the cake. Then I'm going to touch on crafting. Crafting has 2 passives that you will definitely enjoy having. The first one comes from the alchemy craft, and that is medicinal use. You are going to want to level up your alchemy all the way. Not only is it nice to be able to actually make your potions on the character who needs them, this will make all of your potions last 30% longer. This means that when you make a good crafted spell power pot or potion, The effects of the potion last 2 seconds longer than the potion cooldown. This means you can get 100% uptime on your potion. Everything that your potion gives you, whether it be, Magicka regen or, major prophecy, whatever, you can have 100% uptime on, because this passive will cause the effects to last longer than the cooldown. Definitely must have passive. A nice to have passive comes from the provisioning skill line. Now, this one is going to depend on if you eat food or if you drink, you're going to want to grab one of these two passives. What it does is add 20 minutes to the duration of any consumed drink or food. So I sometimes use a bit of either or, so I have both passives, but if you only use drinks, grab this one. If you only use food, grab gourmand. So go ahead, that's a really nice to have passive. Okay, now we're going to go into the what? Why would I have that category? These are abilities that you're probably going to be like, why would I level that? And that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Leave this till the very last. But one day somebody might mention who has this ability, and they're going to be damn happy that someone does. First one is from the support line in the Alliance War. Purge. You want to unlock Purge. Even better if you can actually level Purge up and get efficient Purge. There is a few different dungeons on trials that having a Purge is really nice, or like it will murder everybody if the effect does not get purged. So it's really handy to have this leveled up to be efficient Purge, where it costs less magicka. People are going to be really glad that when the DPS can slot it too. The other ability I'm going to mention comes from that weird stamina Fighters Guild skill line. Silver Bolts actually turns into Silver Leash. Silver Leash can pull enemies toward you like a Dragonite chain. There's a couple instances in this game where having a DPS able to pull in adds because the tank is too busy doing other things is really handy, and your group is just going to be really happy that you're willing to slot this, because everything will just go down a lot faster if all of your adds are grouped up. So even though it's a stamina ability, it's a good, handy one to have for those super rare circumstances. So if you're bored, go pew with a little Fighters Guild bow for a while and level that up to Silver Leash. Well, that's it for Sorc School Part 4. I hope you learned about what skills and passives you want to make sure you grab first and why you're using those versions. Are there any skills or passives that you felt deserved to be on this list but weren't? Make sure you let me know in the comments below. You can also find this video guide as a written guide on my website, MissBizzPlays.com, with a link in the description direct to that written guide. Super easy to reference back to. Just want to thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, if it helped you out, be sure to hit the like button, and don't forget there's more parts of this DPS guide coming out, so if you want to make sure you don't miss those, hit subscribe to my channel as well. Thank you for joining me. I'm Miss Bizz. Bye for now.